Hello, and welcome to the Family Histories Podcast, the show for and about those of us who are sat quietly in libraries, archives, and spare rooms all around the world, tirelessly piecing together our collective social and family history. My name is Andrew Martin, I'm a family historian, and I'll be your host. In this episode, The Incorrigible, we'll hear about a man who tries hard to escape the fishing industry, and then we'll be looking for the origins of an 18th century man in Cambridgeshire. So, put down that old map, grab a cuppa, and let's meet our guest. Today, I'm joined by a professional genealogist whose background in science lends itself to her passion for genetic genealogy. She did, however, leave science behind to join us here full-time in our wonderful world of genealogy, and along the way became the owner and a tutor at the online family history course provider, Pharos Tutors. So, before I miss my deadline and we have to resit this introduction all over again, I should introduce my guest. It's Dr. Karen Cummings. Hello, Karen. Welcome to the Family Histories Podcast.
Hello, Andrew. It's lovely to be here.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. Now, we always start with the same question, and that is, how did you end up researching your family history?
Well, I think, like many people, my interest began when I was a child, really listening to my mother's stories of aunts and uncles. And I think by the time I was 10, I'd already got a family tree in my head of all her relatives were. Many years later, she took me to the Hopkins family grave in Erdington. Yep. And I found that absolutely fascinating because there were 3 generations all commemorated on a single gravestone. Oh. But I think, like many people, I didn't really sort of start taking it seriously until I was older. And unfortunately, my mum passed away quite young, so she wasn't around to join me on the journey. But when I got married and was looking at a family of my own, I started to look into it more seriously. And like many people, was quickly completely addicted. And as you say, left my career in science behind because I wanted to follow my working life as a job in something I just loved so much.
Nice. So what sort of records did you start your research with?
I never visited St Catherine's house, and I'm sure many people gasp at that.
No. Neither did I.
Because that seems to be the sort of marker by which people define themselves as a genealogist. But I started everything online as a newbie. I've actually found an email I'd sent in the early days the other day where one of the record offices was kindly explaining to me that you couldn't get birth certificates before 1837, which is obviously very early days. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that.
Why
now.
Not?
Yes. But yes, I started with, the basic records online and went from there. But I had a particular fascination with these Hopkins line because they're the ones that my mum had talked to me about when I was younger. But I also found out, I grew up in the Midlands and I thought they all came from around there.
Okay.
So I was surprised to find that a huge chunk of my family came from Cambridgeshire, Suffolk, Essex, Norfolk, all around the East Anglia region. In fact, not far from where I now live. So that was, another fascination to it, really.
Wow. Well, we'll have to check our records after this call at some point because, Cambridgeshire is basically the county in which my family failed to find the border for.
Right.
So hundreds of years of them. So we'll check that later on. But
yeah. So
did you have many photographs and family documents or relatives to help you through this research?
Unfortunately, my grandparents had all passed when I started doing this. I was lucky enough to inherit some photographs and documents from my mother. We've also been lucky enough to be the sort of repository for all the family documents for my husband's family as well.
Okay, yeah.
But yes, I have some photographs, less paperwork and more the photographs of the grandparents' generation, not a lot older than that. But I have, along the way made connections with cousins and found lots of other things that way.
And as you've been researching, have you kind of established a process and kind of learnt how to research?
I think definitely. Methodology is one of my passions, and I don't know whether that just comes from my scientific background or whether it's just something I've always been interested in. But yes, the methodology of research is just as much a passion to me as genetic genealogy, really. And it is, in fact, the topic of my book that comes out next year. So, yes, that's very exciting. But, yes, I mean, having a process, because you can quite quickly become overwhelmed, can't you? You start collecting censuses, or you do that research late at night after your day job, and you get to 2 a.m, and you've got no recollection of what you've looked at, what your route was to where you've got.
Yeah. Been there, yeah.
So things like that really taught me early on that I needed to define a way of working and a process and write everything down.
Yeah, definitely. And those citations, because the number of times I found this scrap of information and thought, that's amazing. I need to just look at, oh no, now where did I find that?
I don't think it's sort of a lack of interest in recording things. I think it's because we're so enthusiastic about doing research that we just want to get on with it, don't we? And we kind of click, and we're galloping through records. And I myself have found notes I made early on saying found on Ancestry, and mentally slapped myself on the wrist for not writing anything more down than that. But I mean, even, in the years since I've been researching, some of the record collections that were available have now gone.
Right.
Some of the early parish register collections were on, I think it was something called origins.net, and that went to Find My Past, and then they all disappeared. So, if you can start questioning your own sanity, I think, if you don't write down where you found things.
So how do you share your research with your family?
The very few number of people that are actually interested in family history research.
Well, how do you get them interested?
I think it varies. I have a public family tree on Ancestry. I deliberately don't include all my research notes because I want people to contact me and tell me, about their research as well, rather than just taking what I've provided.
Yeah.
So I want it to be a conversation starter. Very early on, I attempted to write up everything I'd done in a book form and sent out copies of the relevant chapters to people in the family. But of course, by the time they'd received it, it was out of date because I was finding out more and more and more. So I've not done that for a little while. But yeah, I mean, there are people that like to have an update on the latest findings from time to time. But more often than not, genealogy network groups and shows like Who Do You Think You Are the places where we really are free to discuss family history for as long as we like, aren't they?
You can have a big nerd out.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you and I have previously appeared together as guests on episodes of the Really Useful podcasts from the Family History Federation.
Yeah.
And one of them was on DNA testing. So I know, of course, that you have used DNA in your research. So perhaps I should ask you, how has it contributed to your research?
Well, I mean, people have many reasons for testing DNA. Some people have a very fixed question that they want the answer to. I am a self-confessed data nerd, frankly, and I just wanted to test everything I could test to find out what it could tell me.
Fair enough.
One of the things I love about DNA is it's almost like having your ancestors with you in the room saying, yes, you've got that bit right, tick, because it does confirm the paper trail. Mm-hmm. So I've used it a lot in that way to look at different lines and confirm what I've carried out. I have one line where I've got very, very few matches, and I'm still a little bit suspicious that this all may not be as it seems, but that's a work in progress.
Oh, okay.
But I've certainly found I have a great grandmother on my mother's side who I suspected was illegitimate.
Right.
And it was through DNA that I was able to verify my thought process, because, of course, the problem with researching illegitimacy is there's very, very rarely a document that says, and the father was.
Yeah.
So you have to pull together a variety of different pieces of evidence and create a sort of circumstantial evidence case for the most likely scenario. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where people use DNA a lot, is to be that final piece of the puzzle to solve those particular mysteries.
Wow, but DNA is very exciting. I have quite a few unknown fathers in my ancestry, and it's always tantalizing to look through those matches and think, oh, where are you? Which one of you is going to give me the clue?
Absolutely. And it's normally the one with the surname of Smith or something, isn't it? It's always the one that's a little bit more tricky to research.
It's when you're just hesitant to click on, to go, oh, this is a can of worms waiting for me.
Absolutely.
Now, you're the owner and managing director of Farrell's Tutors, whom several of our previous guests have studied with and or are tutors with. Now, Pharos already existed, so what led you to purchase that company?
Well, I'd actually tutored at Pharos from a fairly early on in my genealogy career.
Oh, I see.
I've been tutoring with them since I think 2014. I loved the way the courses were presented. I loved the fact that they were very practical. The tutors are all so enthusiastic about their subjects. Quite often the tutors have written books on their topics of speciality. Yeah. And it was just delivered in such a practical way. And I found myself going back to course notes over and over again from the courses I'd taken. In fact, the very first course I took with Pharos was the professional genealogy course, which I now tutor.
Right.
And I think there was a line in that course when I took it talking about expanding your horizons as a professional genealogist. And it's not just about researching for clients. What other avenues might you like to explore? And it said something like, who knows, you may become a tutor for us one day. And I thought, wow, that would be so amazing. I'd never be brave enough to do that.
There's a goal.
Yeah. So anyway, yes, I'd had been tutoring for a while. I was also tutoring elsewhere and I was really enjoying the teaching process. And then I was actually offered the company by Helen Osborne, the previous owner. And I think it was one of those things I'd got in my mind I would like to do at some point. But it was just, it was just too good an opportunity. Yeah. And it's been a whirlwind of an experience, no doubt about it. But it's been fabulous. It's been absolutely fabulous. And it's just growing and growing and growing.
Wow. Well, I'm just a hobbyist family historian. So why should I consider studying a genealogy course?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Because we quite often think, the courses and the formal certificate courses are more for people that want to undertake it professionally. But this is about... one of my greatest mantras when I'm teaching is allowing students to get the most from their research. It's not about me saying this is how you should do it. It's about somebody thinking, oh, actually, if I tried that, that would help me with this particular problem, or I hadn't thought of looking at that. And some of the records that we're used to using, you don't get the most from them unless you've really studied where they came from. Why? Because records weren't created for genealogists. We're just kind of dipping in around the edges and trying to glean information where we can for most of the time. And I think by really understanding records, that's how you can get the most from them. One of the greatest examples of that is where you don't find somebody. And it's only by really understanding how those records were created and why and who should appear in those records that you can then understand why you haven't found it. Now, it might be, for example, a taxation record, and perhaps people of a certain social status weren't included because they were too poor to pay and therefore exempt, and things like that. And I think it increases your enjoyment as well because you can start using those records with more confidence. Yeah. And that's another benefit many people find is they're just more confident in what they're doing. They're more confident that the family tree that they have in front of them is their family tree. And certainly that's what I aim to do with the methodology courses I teach. But it's also just as applicable to the sources. And some of the sources that people find as, the scary sources that are too hard to contemplate, like things like manorial records and chancery records and things like that. They put, you can see people's eyes like open in fear sometimes when you mention them. But they can be so accessible. And they can show you so much about a family that you won't find elsewhere.
Wow. Maybe I'll have a browse of those courses then.
See
what I can find. Do they tend to be quite long? How long do they kind of tend to run on average?
They range between 3 and 6 weeks, but most are 4 or 5 weeks only.
Okay.
And some of them are assessed, but you can see a course that's part of a certificate and think, actually, I just want to know about those records. So you can just take one course, and even on that one course, you can choose whether you want feedback on your work or you can just take it as a non-assessed student. So the aim is, everything is flexible. You can take courses in whatever way works best for you.
Now, you've just mentioned what I would perhaps consider to be tricky, scary, nightmarish sources there. But what's your favourite, or what do you think is the most useful type of record?
Oh, gosh, that's so difficult, isn't it? I think in terms of understanding your ancestors. Wills are one of my favourite records because not only do you get to hear personal opinions of your ancestors as they've written their wills, but you can also find out about a huge number of family members in one document, which makes them so valuable. Particularly wills of elderly widows. They could include grandchildren, great-grandchildren, married names of daughters and all those things in one. But I think in terms of just getting the gossip, Chancery records are brilliant as well. To hear what people say about each other is just wonderful this far on in time.
Wow. Well, I'm intrigued by those types of records, and maybe I'll see if I can find some juicy gossip on my own relatives. What does genealogy mean to you?
Oh gosh, that is a good question. I think there is an element of, a lot of people begin a journey in family history because of an event in their life, whether that's a joyful event such as a marriage or a birth of a child or the passing of a parent. Yeah. And I think there's that kind of quest for a sense of identity. How do we fit within the bigger picture? And I think that for me is definitely part of it. Who are these people that came before me? Who were the people what experiences did they have that perhaps contributed to the way I feel about things now? Or, I've always been quite a highly driven person to get the best out of everything I do. Where did that come from? Which ancestors have passed that on and things like that. So I think that's definitely a big part of it. But I also, when I'm working for other people, just love to see their reactions and it can be so different. It means so many different things to different people. Some people really want to find out they've got the criminal ancestor that was, transported to Australia, and there's lots of gossip. And to somebody else, finding out that actually for generations everybody's lived in the village they now live in is a fantastic finding. So it's lovely to see that difference in reaction of different people to different stories.
Yeah. And what do you think or hope the family history industry might go to next? Because we've had obviously DNA testing, which is obviously evolving as well, but we've also had AI things. And where do you think it's heading?
I think with AI, we're only just scratching the surface. I think there's so much more that's going to happen with AI. And I just hope that it's a positive change. Yeah. I mean, we've seen with some of the big commercial companies now, because they present searching family history as simply typing your name in a box and clicking a button. There's less of an emphasis on actually that might not be the right answer. There's less emphasis on checking that those suggestions are correct. Because, if a big important company says that's my great granddad, then surely that must be my great. And I can see why people would think that because of the way it is presented. Yeah. And I think the key with AI will be to question it for as long as we need to. Certainly now we were already seeing, searches for records and so on. But some of the, simple tasks like writing things up and transcribing documents, they're going to be great time savers as well. But certainly, and within search engines, within the DNA tools, it's always going to save us so much time, I think. But the records are not going to change. The records are still, dusty documents in boxes in archives. And I think
they're not dusty.
Oh, I don't know. Some of the ones I have turned my skin a different colour. but I think that it is important to bear in mind that that's still what we're searching in whatever form we're searching it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point. The AI tools look very exciting and shiny right now, and they are to some respect. But we need to be clever and wise in knowing how to use them as tools and when not to use them. Do you remember your first breakthrough?
It's going back a bit in time now. I think it was actually finding these ancestors that had lived just up the road from me. And I thought, but I drive past there on the way to work every single day. And it was just lovely to have something with a local connection. And that was the first time that I'd driven somewhere I'd never been before and thought, well, my relatives will have walked along this street, or, those kind of things. I have now found a link to the actual town I live in as well, which was quite nice. It's a little bit of a collateral link, but it's still, they're my family, as we say. But I think finding that kind of local connectivity has been lovely.
Yeah.
But I didn't know very much at all about my father's side of the family. It was just not a topic that was discussed as much. So it wasn't really breakthroughs, it was just learning to start with on that side of the family, because I didn't really know much about them at all. But it was my father's mother's Cowling line that is the local line to me.
It's always nice when you discover that some relatives or ancestors have lived or worked or have had some of their life in the place where you currently are. And in a way, on so many levels, it literally brings it home. And that's a lovely feeling.
Absolutely.
As we climb the lofty boughs of our family trees, we sometimes come across those little branches or leaves that reveal something incredible. A fascinatingly good, bad, or just plain ugly relative. So, with this in mind, it's now time for my guest to choose one of their most fascinating relatives and then tell their life story. Okay, Karen, who are you going to introduce us to?
Well, I've chosen one of my husband's relatives, actually. It was one of his paternal great-grandfathers, a chap by the name of Jonathan Horsley.
Okay.
And I've selected him because, firstly, he is probably the person for whom we have the most documentation.
Right.
But he is also the person for whom research has been the most difficult and has led me around trials and twists and tribulations. But as you say in your introduction about finding someone good or bad who particularly takes our interest, this is an example of a baddun for sure.
Or juicy stories.
I love the fact that I have found him described as an incorrigible in multiple records.
When you said there were lots of pieces of information about this person, I got kind of excited, thinking lots of paperwork usually means maybe a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, unfortunately, the paperwork that we have does not reveal any of this side of the story at all.
Okay.
It is more of the later life where I think he turned a new leaf. But early on, he had a very difficult start in life, really. That's where the story begins.
Okay, so paint the scene for Jonathan. Where does this story start?
So Jonathan was born in a place called Coggeshall in Essex, which is famous for lace making.
Yeah.
And he was born in 1869. He was one of several siblings. And 2 years later, on the 1871 census, the family appears together as a family group, just as most of our family groups do, with nothing untoward suspected in any way at all.
Yeah.
However, 3 years before Jonathan was born, there was a notice in the local paper offering a reward for information about his father, who had deserted his wife and children. So there was already a hint that, all was not well at home. The father had returned by the census record. But 3 years after the census, in 1874, Jonathan's mother had a child and followed by another child, both of whom were born in the local workhouse and both of whom had no father named.
Right.
So his early years were very disrupted. His father was absent. He eventually deserted the family completely, and I did find him living a separate life later. So Jonathan was born 1871, appears with the family. Unfortunately, by the next census year in 1881, Jonathan and his older brother were living in the Colchester workhouse.
Right.
And I think what had happened is his mother had remarried, and it just looks as though the new husband either couldn't or wouldn't take in all of her children. The two younger ones were with the new family, and Jonathan and his older brother were in the workhouse, which was a fairly sort of common thing to happen where people didn't have a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, by the age of 11, he's in the workhouse. And then that's kind of where it all kind of started to fall to pieces for him, really.
Oh, dear.
Sadly, the records in terms of discussing individual inmates don't survive for Jonathan in the workhouse. However, there are reports of his misdemeanours, shall we say, in the local papers. By 86, so 5 years later, he appeared at the Petty Sessions Court sleeping out.
Right.
Later the same year, he did 14 days hard labour for sleeping out, and that was the first time he was described as an incorrigible. So he was obviously well known to the authorities, and whether or not he then returned to the workhouse, I don't know. He was obviously having trouble supporting himself, but the workhouse guardian records do indicate that paupers from the workhouse were being sent to Grimsby as fishing apprentices.
Okay, yeah.
And this is where Jonathan ended up going. Now, whether he was picked up on the streets, because that often happened too, waifs and strays were just recruited, probably promised things that they would never see, but they were either taken away, or whether he went back to the workhouse and was sent from there, I don't know. But by the end of 86, he was in Grimsby and had started an apprenticeship as a fishing apprentice for 4 years, which would have taken him to being 21. Now, fishing apprenticeship conditions were harsh. There were often tales of cruelty, of mistreatment. It was dangerous work. Many of these boys will never have even seen the sea before they went and were suddenly working on a boat. Yeah. And I think it was something like a third of those signed up in the 1880s and then later absconded and didn't complete their apprenticeship. So that's a high percentage, which shows you, well, it shows you firstly that the kind of people being recruited probably weren't suited for the work, but also the kind of conditions that they were having to endure.
Yeah, they didn't meet their course expectations.
No. And he didn't play nicely. Only a couple of months in, he was charged with what was called stopping the ship, which essentially meant he refused to go with them. So he was charged for that. And later, he absconded and was sentenced to 21 days hard labour. This is all in the first few months of this apprenticeship. It hadn't even been confirmed at this point. And he was assigned to a small sailing vessel called the Panurge. It was only 3 men and 2 boys. So obviously, if one of them does a runner, that's going to have a huge impact on what they can do.
Significant, yeah.
By April of the following year, his indenture was confirmed and he was quoted as promises to go on well, which lasted probably about a minute and a half from the records I found. And he continued to abscond. He was charged. He ran off. And by about a year into his apprenticeship, his master was quoted as saying, "If he disappears, I will not look for him and I will not charge him any further." There was a warrant for him to leave Grimsby. But the records continue. He came back. He spent a little bit more time. He was charged for wandering about on pontoons, for absconding. And eventually, in 89, so we're 2.5 years into the apprenticeship, he was sentenced to 3 months hard labour for theft.
Oh dear.
Now, at that time, because the master supplied clothing, it might well be that he literally had absconded, but he was wearing the clothes given to him by his master, and he'd had enough. It might be that. It might be something additional to that.
Yeah, classed as theft.
But as you read through the register, it's just increasingly frustrated comments. And ultimately what happened was 2.5 years in, the indenture was cancelled and it was written in nice red ink, cancelled, incorrigible. So he lasted 2.5 years, and within those 2.5 years, he got paid for 14 weeks. And he never progressed beyond the pay of the cook, which was the sort of starting level where you were cooking meals, keeping the place tidy, running errands and, doing the kind of general skivvy type jobs. So I wouldn't imagine it was a very fulfilling role. But he did later improve in his behaviour. He joined the army. And his army records were quite colourful to start with, loss of good conduct pay, hard labour, the pattern continued. And then later on, we start to see a change in behaviour. So he served in the Boer War, and when he was discharged, and with the appropriate medals as well, we've seen a turnaround in conduct. There was some time where he's joined a temperance society to show he's, straight-laced and good behaviour. Yeah. And he was being awarded good conduct pay. So during that time, perhaps it was good for him, perhaps it was more fitting with what he wanted out of life. But he joined the army in around the time of the Boer War, and he later went back onto the boats in Grimsby, where he settled. Must have convinced people that he'd completed his apprenticeship because he was working as a seaman and then worked on the ships in the war. So he was an incorrigible that turned good, which I like. Yeah. I like it about him. I think, given his start in life, he was never really fated to have much luck. So I do feel for him, but I love the fact he was an incorrigible who turned good.
Yeah, it's always nice to see them go that way.
Yes.
I mean, that's quite a pattern of behaviour.
Absolutely.
Where in his life kind of age-wise does he seem to kind of turn?
It would have been when he was around 30. So, that added maturity just before he then married and settled down.
Yeah.
He then is a much more respectable individual, if you like. He actually died aboard a trawler in the Royal Naval Reserve that was hit by a mine. So he actually went down on a boat. That was how he ended his life. But I've got a letter he wrote to his daughter from the boat, in the months before he died. This, he was clearly literate as well. He could write his handwriting. And it's just nice to see that turnaround of his life coming from this incorrigible rogue to a family man.
Yeah. The fishing industry in Grimsby at that time was booming. So there was obviously a lot of work. And so I'm surprised at just how long he got kept with his apprenticeship master.
Yeah.
And wasn't just sort of cancelled much earlier.
I think it was possibly to do with the number of people that were absconding. It wasn't like he was unusual.
Okay.
I think it was a challenge for them to keep hold of their apprentices. And obviously he would have been living with his master. He'd paid for food and board. He'd paid for clothing. So he'd invested in his case.
Yeah. It would definitely have been hard work.
Definitely.
You've hinted about when he unfortunately dies on a boat. So what kind of becomes of him once he gets married?
He had a daughter. When he married the mother of his daughter, both of them had been married before. Unfortunately, his first wife died within a year or so of the marriage, and his wife had been married before. So it was a blended family of stepchildren as well. And then, unfortunately, he joined up into this First World War, and the trawler was hit by a mine, and everybody drowned.
It's a sad end for him.
Yes. But at least he was in a good place, I think. That's the positive for me.
Yes. Yeah. What was it like when you were uncovering document after document detailing him? Were you thinking it's going to end at some point soon?
Well, I'd only got within our family papers, we've got bits of documents from the army, and we've got letters to the widow from the First World War service. And we had a certificate that hinted at fishing, but nothing of the time before that. So I didn't know he was a baddun.
Okay.
I'd seen there was one comment in the army paperwork we had about his conduct improving.
Right.
And that was all. So all of this fantastically juicy stuff, I only found out when I was conducting the research. And as you can imagine, I very much enjoyed telling my husband all about his incorrigible, badly behaved ancestor.
Were you seeing things in like newspapers?
Yeah. Newspapers. I mean, when he was charged in Grimsby as well, it's in the Grimsby newspapers. He was in the Colchester newspapers. He was in the Grimsby newspapers, and so on. So it was, yes, it is an example of somebody where there's a lot of paper trail, and that can be quite unusual. So I did a lot of research into the apprenticeship registers, the shipping lists, the crew lists. He doesn't often appear on the crew list, as you can imagine, because he was very rarely on board by the sounds of it. and that was the other interest as well, because it's a completely different set of records. It was something I knew nothing about. And I think that's one of the aspects that we most enjoy, isn't it? But it's just finding something completely different to get our teeth into.
Wow. It sounds like he came good in the end.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Karen, for sharing the story of Jonathan Horsley. But I think it's now time for you to face the brick wall. How many brick walls do you have? Ugh, I don't even want to think about it, but I do know the feeling I get when one of those comes crashing down. And sometimes all it took was a fresh set of eyes or a different approach to research. Speaking of which, it's time for my guest to share one of their brick walls in a hope that a listener just like you might be able to help them make a breakthrough. So Karen, how can we help?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, my brick wall is actually on my Cowling line, which is my line of ancestors that are all local to me.
Okay.
And because they're all local to me, you would imagine this was a brick wall I wouldn't have, because I can travel to all the local archives and I can look at all the documents I want to look at whenever I feel like it.
Yeah, what have you been doing?
Exactly. What have I been doing? Unfortunately, this is one of those situations where the record either doesn't exist or was never made in the first place. So it's a brick wall that many have. It's a case of an ancestor appearing in a parish with no baptism there and no baptism being found. So my brick wall comes in the guise of a chap called Sell Cowling.
Okay.
As in Sell as in SELL, which makes searching really difficult because all sorts of irrelevant stuff comes up.
I can imagine double glazing.
Yes.
I bet there's a Cowling double glazing company.
Cowling is something to do with motorbikes as well. If you search for Sell Cowling on eBay, you find all sorts of bizarre and interesting things. So, yes, I begin with a tricky name. And he arrives in a parish in Cambridgeshire called Ickleton, which is not far from Duxford and the Imperial War Museum.
Yes.
And he marries there and he has all his children there. And I have been through all of the parishes of Ickleton, and there were no Cowlings there before him. I've been through all the surname variations I've ever found in any record, nothing like it at all.
Right.
So he is Cowling, Cowland, Cowlan, Cowling with a K instead of a C. All sorts of bizarre things have come up. Okay. And he does not appear in the records for Ickleton. And so I started doing what many of us do. So I started by expanding my search to neighbouring parishes. And this kind of gained momentum. And I'm now running a one-name study for the surname Cowling. I have now reconstituted all of the parish registers for the whole of Cambridgeshire looking for this chap, okay? So
that's how it happens.
It does happen. And unfortunately, he appears in the 1841 census and tells me he was born in Cambridgeshire and then inconveniently died in 1850. So I never had a parish of birth. I say that flippantly, but I'm sure your listeners will understand my frustration.
Yes.
So I started with my focus on Cambridgeshire, and I thought, well, I could guess he meant, oh, maybe that was a mistake, but I've got to start with what I know. And what I know is, according to the records, he was born in Cambridgeshire. So the situation I now find myself in is I have many, many Cowling family trees for all of Cambridgeshire, and two possible places he might fit.
Right.
One of which is just a gap in baptisms, and that's a family that came from Castle Camps, which is not far from Ickleton.
Okay, yeah.
And the second one is a much more intriguing one because some of the baptisms had a note along the lines of the fourth child of and the fifth child of, and it skipped a couple. So there are definitely children for whom there are no baptisms that existed because the next one down has skipped a couple. And that child was from a family that came from Foxton, which is about the same distance from Ickleton in a different direction. Mm-hmm. So they're within the scope of where I would imagine, these families to have come from. And that family goes back from Foxton through to Thriplow. So they're two very disparate family trees currently. And so I've looked at all the records you can imagine, anything for Ickleton and the surrounding areas. And the point I'm reached now is I'm now using DNA as a route to try and uncover the answer to the problem. So I'm running a DNA project, and this is using Y-DNA.
Okay.
So Y-DNA is the one that comes down the male to male to male line. And if you look at the distribution of people with the name Cowling in the census records, you can look at some lovely maps of how surnames are distributed. And there appear to be two big groups of people, one in Yorkshire and one in Cornwall. And of course, we're in East Anglia, so you think, well, that could have possibly been from either of those, essentially.
Yeah, it's quite a distance either way.
But I have got Cowling male line descendants from Cornwall and from Yorkshire who are more closely related to one another than my line of Cowlings, which is typical. I do have a connection to a family just over the border in Huntingdonshire. So that's where I am currently. So my plea, if you like, to help me solve this brick wall is for any male Cowling descendants who would be willing to contribute a small sample of their spit for my Y-DNA project, from anywhere in the country, because I'm trying to form these family lines and work out how all of the Cowlings connect together. But particularly if you know of a connection to Cambridgeshire or Foxton or Castle Camps in Cambridgeshire, that would be wonderful. Because at the moment, unfortunately, the Cowling line is a family where quite often they daughtered out.
Yeah.
So there aren't that many direct line male descendants. And I've only got one currently in my own proven documentary trail, but he does connect to this Huntingdonshire family. So I'm confident there isn't a non-paternity event. I have a couple of people I've emailed, and hopefully one day they'll say, yes, I'd love to join in too. But for now, that is where I am stuck, in around 1775, probably in Cambridgeshire.
Ooh. I feel like almost guilty because that's my home turf. So I feel like I desperately need to go and find a cowling ancestor. So on that male to male Y DNA,
yes,
somebody who you want to test now, are they going to have to be male and a cowling surname if the usual pattern has had to follow, or might they be someone else?
Yes, it will be a cowling male who is, unless it's an adoptee, perhaps, who knows he's born a cowling, then obviously that's different. But it needs to be a biological cowling to cowling to cowling. There can't be any females along that line, or the Y DNA doesn't pass through. Wow.
Okay, this is a nice, unique, specific request. I like it.
Yes, it's fantastic and it's great fun, and I love working on it as a one-name study because obviously I'm learning more and more about the family groups as well, and that's fascinating in itself to see, you know, the difference in social status of different parts of the cowling. And there's a cowling branch that came to the area through the university, and obviously, you know, they've all got much more fancy names and university qualifications and left lovely wills. And then there's my lot who were all labourers.
I was actually going to ask what the occupation of Sel Cowling was.
Sel was a labourer, yes.
Yeah. I wondered, just with the missing baptisms, whether he got a job somewhere else, away somewhere, and then came back.
Possibly. I mean, I assume he arrived at Ickleton through one of the hiring fairs as a casual labourer, but it's how far he came from. And I have started looking, you know, for the name in other counties. But if I ever find the name, then obviously that's a great clue. I fear he was missed, and that makes it more challenging.
Yeah, that's annoying when the church has no records made during a period of years, and you're thinking, why? Are those records lost? Were they just sat on their hands? Or
the challenge with Cambridgeshire as well is there's so many families that married into each other. Because
I know about that. For sure,
yes, I'm sure you know about that. So Sel Cowling married a lady called Sarah Knights, but the Knights family, there's multiple connections, and I have some, because I haven't mentioned autosomal DNA, because autosomal DNA can help back to 5 to 7 generations. So Sel is 6 generations back from my dad. So I keep thinking, there's a chance. And I have a feeling that many of the people that I have got connections to through Sel and Sarah are actually Knights DNA segments. Certainly through the Foxton line, there's another Knights connection. And yes, so the kind of Cambridgeshire big families that marry into each other doesn't help me a great deal from the autosomal side.
Well, this is a very exciting brick wall.
Yeah.
So, what's the best way for listeners to make contact if they think that they have a clue or a research idea?
Well, they can find my study on the Guild of One Name Study website, or they can also contact me through my own website, which is professionalfamilyhistory, all one word, .co.uk.
Excellent. Well, we'll put links in the show notes for this. And of course, listeners can head over to familyhistoriespodcast.com, where they can read this episode's show notes and send us a message, or they can just email us at hello@familyhistoriespodcast.com, and we'll pass the message along to Karen. Now, I really hope that we can crack this one, and I can hear the listeners busily finishing off their notes. But while we wait, it's just possible that I might be able to help you with this, but you'll need to follow me through to the garage.
Okay.
Well, here we are. My secret time machine.
You have a time machine? I wasn't expecting this.
What can I say? Comes in very handy when my own research gets tough. And it's also pretty useful for when I forget a birthday.
Sometimes it also works.
Ignore my assistant, Shandor. It's actually a highly technical piece of equipment.
It's impressive.
Well, I knew a scientist would be able to recognise the magnificence of it.
What's this on the floor?
What's that?
It's a number 6.
I think you'll find it's a 9, actually, but don't worry. That keeps popping off. I'll glue it back on soon, but for now, there we go. Good as new. Now, where was I?
Time machine.
Oh, yes. So, Karen, as a sort of thank you for being in today's episode, I thought you might like a little trip back in time. Say, to solve that cowling brick wall for yourself?
Now?
Well, it is a time machine after all. You could be there and back in a flash.
Well, I guess a quick go wouldn't hurt.
It might.
Shandor, what he means is that if you get too involved in events, you could kind of accidentally change them and, well, erase yourself.
Oh.
But I'm sure you'll be careful. Well, if you'd like to grab a seat over there, that's it. And what's the best date and place you could go back to stand a chance of solving this cowling mystery?
Let's head to Ickleton in around 1775.
Okay, well,
I got it.
Oh, excellent.
All set.
Perfect. Okay, Karen, you'll need this temporal beacon. Keep it with you at all times and press the big button when you're ready to come home.
Which?
Which?
No, oh yes, that one. Yeah, big one on the top.
Okay, let's do this.
That's the spirit. Okay, here we go. Karen Cummings, thank you, goodbye, and good luck.
It's all fine. She's right there and on time.
Great. Now, I just need to plug this beacon into the residual energy port. Oh, that number has come off again. There.
What are you doing?
Well, I always say I want a holiday but never get one, and seeing that we're at the end of this season, I thought I'd enjoy a beach holiday and a bit of post-war fever at Clacton-on-Sea in Essex in 1947. You know, before things go all weird.
You packed a case?
Yep, sun cream, shades and... fully charged. Right, now I can use it to hop. Don't forget to water the plants.
See, I knew it wasn't a 9. It's a 6.
Oh, what the...
Oh my God!
My flip-flops are ruined.
Oi, where'd you come from?
What? Oh,
It just appeared out of thin air.
hello there.
Look at his funny costume.
He's not from round here.
He does look odd, don't he?
Are you from that London?
No, I reckon it's a witch.
A witch? Do I look like a witch?
Well, you don't look like one of us.
No, and from where I'm standing, I certainly don't smell like one of you either. Oh, blimey.
It must be a witch.
What's that in his hand?
Give it here.
No. Give it back. Give it back. Don't touch. No.
He's a witch.
He's a witch.
He's a witch. He's a witch. Get him.
Oh, no.
He's a witch. He's a witch. He's a witch. He's a witch.